Disclaimer: This video is not the full movie or series, but a long-form review, analysis, and commentary created under fair use for educational and entertainment purposes only. All video clips used have been transformed with original narration and editing. Disclaimer: This video is not the full movie or series, but a long-form. This is not a movie. This is a full movie review.
Imagine waking up, not in your bed, not on Earth, but inside a cold, silent spacecraft drifting through the endless darkness of space with no memory of who you are, why you're there, or what your mission is. This is exactly how Project Hail Mary begins, instantly pulling the audience into a state of confusion, curiosity, and psychological tension, because the story doesn't just throw you into space, it traps you inside the mind of a man who is slowly trying to rebuild his identity from nothing. And that man is Ryland Grace, portrayed by Ryan Gosling, who delivers not just a performance, but an experience of isolation, intelligence, fear, and eventually purpose. As the narrative unfolds, the film carefully reveals that Grace is not a trained astronaut, not a warrior, not even someone who ever dreamed of becoming humanity's last hope, but rather a middle school science teacher, a microbiologist, someone whose greatest strength isn't physical power, but knowledge, logic, and the ability to solve impossible problems under pressure. And this is where the film separates itself from traditional sci-fi blockbusters, because instead of relying on explosions or action sequences, it builds tension through scientific discovery, through puzzles, through the terrifying realization that the sun itself is dying. Yes, the very source of life on Earth is slowly losing its energy due to a mysterious organism known as astrophage, and if it isn't stopped, the entire planet will freeze into extinction. What makes this concept so powerful is how grounded it feels, because the story is based on real scientific principles, something that traces back to the original novel by Andy Weir, the same mind behind The Martian, which means every solution, every problem, every moment of discovery feels believable, calculated, and intellectually satisfying. And as Ryland's memory starts returning in fragments, the audience begins to understand the true scale of the mission. He was sent on a one-way journey across light years of space to find the origin of astrophage and stop it before humanity is wiped out. A mission so dangerous that survival was never expected. But just when the story seems like a pure survival narrative, something extraordinary happens. Something that completely transforms the emotional core of the film. Grace discovers that he is not alone. In the vast emptiness of space, he encounters an alien life form, later known as Rocky. And this is where Project Hail Mary evolves from a science-based survival story into one of the most unique friendship stories ever told in sci-fi cinema. Because Rocky is not a humanoid alien, not something familiar or easy to understand, but a completely different kind of intelligence, with its own biology, its own way of perceiving reality. And yet, despite all those differences, the two beings begin to communicate, to collaborate, and eventually to trust each other. This relationship becomes the emotional heartbeat of the film because it represents something deeper than survival. It represents connection beyond language, beyond species, beyond fear. And in a universe that feels cold and indifferent, this unexpected friendship becomes the only source of warmth, humor, and hope. Their interactions are not just scientific exchanges, but moments of curiosity, confusion, and even humor, as both try to understand each other's worlds, gradually building a bridge between two completely alien civilizations. From a cinematic perspective, the direction by Phil Lord and Christopher Miller brings a unique balance of intelligence and entertainment, ensuring that the film never feels too heavy despite its complex scientific themes, while still maintaining a strong emotional core. Visually, the film is expected to deliver stunning representations of deep space, alien environments, and high-concept scientific phenomena, creating an immersive experience that rivals films like Interstellar while maintaining the grounded, problem-solving tone of The Martian. Critically, early reactions and expectations suggest that Project Hail Mary could become one of the defining sci-fi films of the decade, not because it is loud or explosive, but because it is intelligent, emotional, and deeply human at its core. It challenges the audience to think, to feel, and to imagine a future where survival doesn't depend on strength, but on cooperation, curiosity, and the willingness to trust the unknown. And perhaps the most powerful aspect of the story is its underlying message that even in the face of extinction, even when humanity seems completely alone, the universe might still hold unexpected allies. And sometimes the key to saving the world is not fighting harder, but understanding better. And as the story of Project Hail Mary continues to unfold, it becomes less about a mission and more about the transformation of a man who never believed he was capable of carrying the weight of an entire species on his shoulders. Because Ryland Grace is not introduced to us as a hero, but as someone deeply human, someone who is afraid, uncertain, and at times even unwilling. And that internal conflict is what makes the narrative so gripping. Because unlike traditional protagonists, Grace doesn't run towards danger with confidence. He hesitates, he questions, and he struggles with the terrifying reality that every decision he makes could determine the fate of billions. And that psychological tension becomes one of the strongest pillars of the film's storytelling. As more of his memories return in fragmented flashes, the audience is taken back to Earth, where humanity is already beginning to feel the catastrophic effects of the dying sun, crops failing, temperatures dropping, governments collapsing under pressure. And within this chaos emerges a desperate global effort to find a solution, led by some of the brightest scientific minds on the planet. These sequences are not just exposition, they are a reflection of how fragile civilization truly is when faced with a cosmic-level threat, and how quickly order can turn into panic when survival is no longer guaranteed. What makes these flashbacks particularly powerful is how they contrast with the isolation of space, because while Earth is filled with noise, conflict, and urgency, the spacecraft is silent, controlled, and eerily calm. And this contrast amplifies the emotional weight of Grace's journey, reminding the audience that while billions are suffering on Earth, one man is floating alone in the void, trying to solve a problem that no one else can reach. But the real brilliance of the story lies in how it uses science, not just as a tool, but as a narrative language. Every experiment, every calculation, every discovery becomes a moment of tension and excitement because the audience understands that these are not just abstract concepts, but steps towards either salvation or extinction. And this is where the influence of Andy Weir becomes even more evident, as the film embraces detailed, realistic problem solving in a way that feels both educational and thrilling at the same time. And then there is Rocky, a character that could have easily been reduced to a gimmick, but instead becomes one of the most memorable and emotionally impactful elements of the entire story. Because Rocky is not just an alien companion, he is a mirror, a reflection of humanity seen from an outside perspective. His way of thinking, his logic, his priorities, they are all different, yet strangely relatable. And as the bond between them grows stronger, the film begins to explore themes of trust, communication, and cooperation on a level rarely seen in sci-fi cinema. Their interactions are filled with moments that range from deeply intellectual to unexpectedly humorous, as both characters attempt to decode each other's languages, share knowledge, and work together towards a common goal. And it is within these moments that the film finds its heart, because despite the vastness of space and the enormity of the mission, it ultimately comes down to two individuals choosing to help each other, choosing to care. From a visual perspective, the expectations surrounding Project Hail Mary are nothing short of extraordinary, with the potential to deliver some of the most breathtaking space sequences ever put on screen. From the eerie beauty of interstellar travel to the intricate design of alien environments, every frame is expected to contribute to a sense of scale and immersion that pulls the audience deeper into the experience. And yet, despite this visual grandeur, the film never loses sight of its characters, ensuring that the emotional journey remains at the forefront. Another fascinating aspect of the film is how it handles time, not just in the physical sense of traveling across light years, but in the emotional sense of memory, loss, and realization. As Grace pieces together his past, the audience begins to understand the sacrifices that were made, the choices that led him to this moment, and the weight of the responsibility he carries. And this gradual revelation creates a narrative structure that feels both mysterious and deeply satisfying, as every answer leads to new questions, and every discovery brings him closer to the truth. From a review standpoint, what sets this film apart is its ability to balance multiple genres without losing focus. It is at once a science-driven thriller, a character study, a survival story, and an emotional drama. And this versatility is what gives it the potential to appeal to a wide audience, from hardcore sci-fi fans to viewers who are simply looking for a powerful, character-driven story. The performances, particularly by Ryan Gosling, are expected to carry much of the film's emotional weight, as he spends a significant portion of the story either alone.
And as the narrative of Project Hail Mary pushes even further into its emotional and intellectual depths, it begins to evolve into something far greater than just a survival mission or a sci-fi spectacle. It becomes a study of human nature under absolute isolation, a slow-burning psychological transformation where Ryland Grace is not just fighting to save Earth, but also confronting himself. Because when a person is stripped of everything, identity, memory, society, validation, what remains is the purest version of who they truly are. And that is exactly the environment this story places him in. A vacuum where there are no expectations, no judgments, only choices. And those choices define everything. What makes this progression so powerful is the gradual shift in Grace's mindset. In the beginning, his actions are driven by confusion and survival instinct, then by obligation as his memories return. But eventually, something changes, something deeper and more profound. His mission is no longer about being forced to save humanity. It becomes a conscious decision, a choice he embraces despite the fear, despite the odds, despite knowing that he may never return. And that transition from reluctance to acceptance is what transforms him into a true hero, not by design, but by evolution. At the same time, the film continuously expands its scientific scope, diving deeper into the mysteries of astrophage, the organism responsible for draining the sun's energy. And instead of treating it as a generic threat, the story explores its behavior, its biology, and its potential weaknesses with an almost obsessive level of detail, turning science into a form of suspense. Every new piece of information feels like uncovering a clue in a cosmic puzzle, where the stakes are nothing less than the survival of an entire planet. And this is where the brilliance of Andy Weir truly shines, because the science is not just accurate, it is engaging, it is dramatic, and it is essential to the story's momentum. Meanwhile, the bond between Grace and Rocky continues to grow in ways that feel both unexpected and deeply meaningful. Because what starts as a cautious interaction between two unknown beings gradually transforms into a partnership built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. And what makes this relationship so extraordinary is the complete absence of familiarity. There are no shared cultural references, no common language, no physical resemblance, and yet, through patience and curiosity, they manage to create a connection that feels more genuine than many human relationships portrayed in film. Their collaboration becomes a symbol of what humanity could achieve if differences were seen not as barriers but as opportunities for learning. And in a world where division often defines interaction, this aspect of Project Hail Mary feels both refreshing and profoundly relevant, because it suggests that intelligence is not about dominance, but about understanding, not about proving superiority, but about finding common ground. As the story approaches its later stages, the tension begins to intensify in a way that feels both inevitable and unpredictable, because every solution introduces new complications, every success reveals new risks, and every step forward comes with the possibility of irreversible failure. And this constant uncertainty keeps the audience engaged on a deeply emotional level, as they are never allowed to feel completely secure about the outcome. At this point, the film is no longer just asking whether humanity can be saved, but whether it deserves to be saved. A subtle yet powerful question that lingers beneath the surface, challenging the audience to reflect on the nature of progress, responsibility, and coexistence. Because if survival depends on cooperation and understanding, then the real threat may not be external at all. It may lie within the very systems and behaviors that define human civilization. From a cinematic standpoint, the direction by Phil Lord and Christopher Miller is expected to reach its peak during these moments, blending visual spectacle with emotional intensity in a way that feels both immersive and intimate. The vastness of space is contrasted with the closeness of character interaction, creating a dynamic that constantly shifts between awe and introspection. And this balance is what gives the film its unique identity, setting it apart from more conventional sci-fi narratives. Performance-wise, Ryan Gosling is anticipated to deliver one of the most nuanced roles of his career, capturing the subtle changes in Grace's personality as he evolves from a confused survivor into a determined problem solver, and finally into a self-aware individual who understands the true meaning of his mission. And this transformation is not conveyed through grand speeches or dramatic gestures, but through small, quiet moments, expressions, pauses, decisions that reveal the depth of his internal journey. And then comes the emotional core of the film's climax, a moment where science, sacrifice, and connection converge into a single defining choice. A moment where Grace must decide not just how to complete the mission, but what he is willing to give up in order to do so. And it is here that the film is expected to leave its most lasting impact, because the resolution is not just about success or failure, but about meaning, about what it truly means to save the world. Because in the end, saving humanity is not just about preserving life, it is about preserving the potential for kindness, for discovery, for connection. And through its layered storytelling, its rich scientific foundation, and its deeply human characters, the film suggests that even in the darkest corners of the universe, there is still light to be found, not in stars, but in the choices we make and the relationships we build. And perhaps that is the ultimate message of Project Hail Mary, that survival is not a solitary act, but a collective effort, that intelligence without empathy is incomplete, and that even when everything seems lost, the universe may still surprise us with something extraordinary, something unexpected, something that reminds us why we chose to fight in the first place.
And as the final layers of Project Hail Mary begin to unfold, the story reaches a level where it is no longer just being watched. It is being experienced on a deeply personal and almost philosophical level, because everything that has been built up to this point, every scientific discovery, every emotional connection, every moment of doubt and courage starts converging into a singular, overwhelming realization. that this journey was never only about saving Earth, but about redefining what it means to be human in a universe that is vast, indifferent, and yet unexpectedly connected. At this stage, Ryland Grace is no longer the same individual who woke up confused and alone at the beginning of the film. He has evolved, not just intellectually, but emotionally and morally. And this evolution is what gives the climax its weight, because the decisions he now faces are not driven by fear or obligation, but by understanding. He knows the consequences, he understands the risks, and most importantly, he accepts them. And that acceptance transforms the narrative from a story of survival into a story of purpose. The tension reaches its peak as the mission approaches its critical point, where every variable must align perfectly, where a single miscalculation could undo everything. And yet, despite the overwhelming pressure, there is a strange sense of calm that begins to settle over the story. Not because the danger has passed, but because the characters have grown into the kind of beings who can face it. And this emotional stillness, this quiet confidence, becomes one of the most powerful moments in the entire film, because it reflects a level of maturity and clarity that can only come from facing the unknown and choosing to move forward anyway. At the heart of this climax lies the relationship between Grace and Rocky, a bond that has transcended its original context and become something almost symbolic, because they are no longer just two individuals working together. They represent two worlds, two perspectives, two completely different forms of life that have found a way to coexist and collaborate. And in doing so, they embody a vision of the universe that is not defined by isolation, but by connection. Their final interactions are expected to carry an emotional weight that goes beyond words, because by this point, the audience is fully invested in their journey, not just as a mission, but as a relationship. And it is within these moments that the film delivers its most profound message, that understanding someone completely different from you is not just possible, but essential. That empathy is not limited by biology or language, but is a fundamental aspect of intelligence itself. From a narrative perspective, the resolution of Project Hail Mary is likely to avoid the simplicity of a conventional happy ending. Instead, it is expected to offer something more nuanced, more reflective, something that acknowledges both the success and the cost of the journey. Because true victory in a story like this is not measured solely by whether the mission succeeds, but by what is learned, what is changed, and what is left behind. And this is where the film's philosophical depth becomes most apparent, as it invites the audience to think beyond the immediate outcome and consider the broader implications of the story. What does it mean for humanity to be saved? What kind of future awaits after such a near-extinction event? And perhaps most importantly, how does an experience like this reshape the way we see ourselves and our place in the universe? Visually, these final moments are expected to be nothing short of breathtaking, combining the vastness of space with the intimacy of character-driven storytelling in a way that creates a sense of scale that is both awe-inspiring and deeply personal. Every shot, every sound, every silence is designed to reinforce the emotional and thematic impact of the story, ensuring that the audience not only understands what is happening, but feels it. Performance-wise, Ryan Gosling is likely to deliver a conclusion that is subtle yet powerful, relying on restraint rather than exaggeration, allowing the audience to project their own emotions onto the character and connect with his journey on a more personal level. And this approach aligns perfectly with the overall tone of the film, which prioritizes authenticity and depth over spectacle for its own sake. But perhaps the most lasting impact of Project Hail Mary lies not in its plot or its visuals, but in the way it stays with the audience long after the credits roll. Because it is a story that raises questions without forcing answers, that presents ideas without limiting interpretation, and that encourages reflection in a way that few films manage to achieve. It leaves you thinking about the fragility of life, the power of knowledge, the importance of connection, and the endless possibilities that exist beyond our current understanding. It reminds you that even in the face of overwhelming odds, there is always a chance for discovery, for growth, for something unexpected to change everything. And in a world where so many stories are focused on conflict and division, Project Hail Mary offers something different, something hopeful, a vision of the future where survival is not achieved through dominance, but through cooperation, where intelligence is not measured by control, but by curiosity, and where the greatest breakthroughs come not from isolation, but from connection. In the end, this is not just a film about space or science or even survival. It is a story about possibility, about the idea that no matter how vast the universe may be, no matter how alone we might feel, there is always the potential for something extraordinary to happen, something that challenges our assumptions, expands our understanding, and reminds us of what we are truly capable of. And that is what makes Project Hail Mary more than just a movie. It becomes an experience, a journey, a reflection of humanity at its most vulnerable and its most brilliant at the same time. A story that doesn't just entertain, but inspires, that doesn't just show you the universe, but invites you to think about your place within it. And now, as we move beyond the surface-level narrative of Project Hail Mary and descend into its deepest interpretive layers, the story begins to feel less like a linear sequence of events and more like an expanding universe of meaning. Because every element, every scientific concept, every emotional beat, every interaction starts to function on multiple levels simultaneously, creating a cinematic experience that is not only consumed, but decoded. And this is where the film truly separates itself from conventional storytelling, because it doesn't just give answers, it invites analysis, it invites obsession. At its core, the journey of Ryland Grace can be interpreted as a metaphor for human consciousness itself. Waking up without memory mirrors the way we enter existence, unaware, unprepared, and searching for identity. And just like Grace, humanity builds its understanding piece by piece through observation, experimentation, and connection. And this parallel gives the story a philosophical resonance that goes far beyond its plot, transforming it into a reflection of how knowledge shapes purpose, and how purpose, in turn, defines existence. The concept of astrophage, while functioning as a scientific threat within the narrative, also carries symbolic weight. It represents an invisible, consuming force, something that drains energy, something that spreads silently, something that threatens stability without immediate detection. And in this sense, it can be seen as a metaphor for any number of real-world challenges, from environmental crises to societal decay. And this duality allows the film to operate both as a sci-fi thriller and as a commentary on the vulnerabilities of civilization. Meanwhile, the character of Rocky introduces an entirely different dimension to the story, one that challenges anthropocentric thinking and forces both the protagonist and the audience to reconsider their assumptions about intelligence, communication, and value. Because Rocky does not conform to human expectations, and yet he is not inferior, he is simply different. And in that difference lies the film's most powerful message, that understanding does not require similarity, only willingness. As their relationship deepens, it begins to transcend the boundaries of narrative function and enter the realm of symbolism. Grace and Rocky become representations of two fundamentally different systems finding harmony, two perspectives merging to create something greater than either could achieve alone. And this idea, while simple on the surface, carries profound implications, suggesting that progress is not the result of uniformity, but of diversity working in alignment. From a structural standpoint, Project Hail Mary employs a layered storytelling technique.
And now, as we step into the ultimate layer of narrative engineering and viral storytelling psychology behind Project Hail Mary, the conversation transforms from analysis into something far more strategic, almost like reverse engineering why this story has the power not only to move audiences emotionally, but to capture attention at a global, algorithm-dominating level. Because in today's world, a film is not just watched, it is clipped, shared, memed, reinterpreted, and re-experienced across platforms. And this is exactly where this story becomes a goldmine for ultra-viral content creation. If we break it down at the deepest level, the reason Project Hail Mary has such extreme viral potential is because it perfectly aligns with the three most powerful psychological triggers of modern audiences: curiosity, relatability, and emotional payoff. And each of these is embedded directly into the structure of the story itself. Curiosity is activated instantly through the opening premise, waking up alone in space without memory. This is not just a hook, it is a psychological trap, because the human brain is wired to seek answers, and when information is missing, attention increases. This is known as the curiosity gap, and this film stretches that gap across its entire runtime, constantly feeding just enough information to keep the viewer engaged while holding back enough to maintain tension. Relatability, surprisingly, comes not from the setting, but from the character. Because despite the extreme environment, Ryland Grace is fundamentally human. He is confused, he is scared, he makes mistakes. And this imperfection is what makes him relatable. Audiences do not connect with perfection, they connect with struggle. And this connection is what keeps them emotionally invested, even when the story ventures into highly complex scientific territory. And then comes the emotional payoff, the element that determines whether a piece of content is simply watched or truly remembered. And this is where the relationship between Grace and Rocky becomes the defining factor, because it delivers something unexpected, something that breaks the pattern of typical sci-fi narratives. Instead of conflict, we get cooperation. Instead of fear, we get understanding. And this subversion of expectations creates a powerful emotional response that lingers long after the story ends. From a content creation perspective, this means that every segment of the film can be transformed into a high-retention clip. The opening confusion can become a scroll-stopping hook. The scientific discoveries can become mind-blowing explainer segments. The interactions with Rocky can become emotional highlight reels, and the climax can become a debate-driven, theory-generating discussion point. And when these elements are combined strategically, they create a content ecosystem that feeds itself. Now, imagine structuring a video around this in a way that maximizes retention. You start with a high-impact statement, something that immediately disrupts the viewer's pattern. Something like, a man wakes up alone in space and realizes the sun is dying. This is not just information, it is a trigger. It creates instant intrigue, forcing the viewer to stay for more.
From there, you layer the information gradually, using fast pacing and visual contrast to maintain engagement. Every few seconds, something new is introduced, a new question, a new discovery, a new twist. And this constant flow prevents the viewer from losing interest because there's always something to anticipate. But the real mastery lies in how the video ends, because the ending determines whether the viewer simply moves on or takes action. And in the case of Project Hail Mary, the story naturally lends itself to a loop ending, something that connects back to the beginning, creating a seamless cycle that encourages re-watching. For example, ending with a question like, "But what if he was never meant to return?" This not only creates curiosity, but also compels the viewer to re-watch the video to find clues. And then comes the final layer, the subscribe psychology. Instead of directly asking for a subscription, the content subtly builds value and trust throughout the video, making the viewer feel like they have gained something meaningful. And when the call to action finally appears, it feels less like a request and more like a natural next step. Something like, if you want more stories that make you think like this, you already know what to do. This approach is far more effective because it aligns with the viewer's experience rather than interrupting it. From a broader perspective, what makes Project Hail Mary so powerful is its ability to function on multiple levels simultaneously. It's a story, a lesson, a question, and an experience all at once. And this multi-layered structure is what allows it to resonate with such a wide audience, from casual viewers to deep thinkers. And this is ultimately the reason why it has the potential to dominate not just the box office, but the entire digital landscape. Because in an era where attention is the most valuable currency, stories that can hold that attention while also delivering emotional and intellectual value are the ones that rise above everything else. In the end, what we're witnessing with Project Hail Mary is not just the release of a film, but the emergence of a narrative phenomenon, something that has the potential to influence how stories are told, how content is created, and how audiences engage with both. It's a reminder that even in a world saturated with information, there is still room for stories that feel fresh, meaningful, and deeply engaging. Stories that challenge us, connect us, and stay with us. And perhaps that's the most powerful takeaway of all. That no matter how advanced technology becomes, no matter how vast the universe may seem, the core of every great story remains the same: a question, a connection, a journey, and the desire to understand something greater than ourselves. As we continue exploring Project Hail Mary, the discussion naturally shifts from storytelling into impact, legacy, audience psychology, and cinematic evolution. Because this film isn't just another space adventure. It represents a new generation of intelligent science fiction that blends emotional storytelling with real scientific thinking in a way that feels both modern and timeless. One of the most important aspects of this story is its commitment to problem solving as entertainment. In many action films, conflict is resolved through force, weapons, or dramatic confrontation. But in this narrative, the core weapon is intelligence. The protagonist doesn't win by overpowering the universe, he wins by understanding it. That shift alone changes the tone of the entire experience. It tells the audience that knowledge is not boring, it is powerful, it is dramatic, it can save worlds. This is why the foundation built by Andy Weir is so important. The story embraces scientific realism. It respects physics. It respects biology. It respects logic. And yet it never becomes dry or academic. Instead, it transforms equations and experiments into into suspenseful moments. Each discovery feels like a breakthrough. Each failure feels like a crisis. The science becomes emotional. Another layer that makes Project Hail Mary so unique is its tone balance. It manages to combine humor, tension, loneliness, wonder, and hope without collapsing into chaos. That balance is extremely difficult to achieve in cinema. Too much seriousness makes it heavy. Too much comedy destroys the stakes. But here, humor appears naturally, especially in the interactions between Grace and Rocky, creating relief without reducing tension. That relationship is not just a subplot, it is the heart of the film. When two completely different beings try to communicate, the audience experiences something powerful, perspective shift. We begin to realize how limited our own worldview might be. We see intelligence in a form that does not look human, and this challenges the assumption that humanity is the center of everything. In doing so, the film expands the concept of connection beyond species, beyond language, beyond biology. This theme alone elevates the story from entertainment to philosophy. Visually, the expectations surrounding Project Hail Mary are massive. Space cinema requires precision, lighting, silence, realism, scale. Space is not just a background, it is a character. It is empty, quiet, and unforgiving. The vacuum creates isolation. The distance creates emotional weight. Every small movement inside the spacecraft feels significant because outside there is nothing but infinite darkness. That contrast between infinity and intimacy is one of the strongest cinematic tools the film can use. The spacecraft becomes a symbol of human limitation. The universe becomes a symbol of possibility. Performance-wise, the burden carried by Ryan Gosling is enormous because much of the story depends on internal emotion rather than constant dialogue. Subtle facial expressions, silence, reaction shots, tone of voice, these elements must carry meaning. That kind of performance requires restraint, it requires intelligence, and it requires trust in the audience's ability to feel without being told. Another major expectation from this film is rewatch value. Stories like this often reveal new details on second viewing, small scientific hints, background clues, structural foreshadowing. When a movie rewards attention, it becomes culturally sticky. Viewers discuss it, they analyze it, they debate it. This discussion keeps the film alive long after release. From a thematic standpoint, one of the most powerful ideas in Project Hail Mary is cooperation across difference. In a time when the real world often focuses on division, the film presents a different vision: survival through collaboration. Instead of competition, cooperation. Instead of fear, understanding. Instead of isolation, partnership. That message resonates strongly in modern storytelling because audiences are increasingly drawn to narratives that feel hopeful without being unrealistic. Another interesting dimension is memory loss as a storytelling device. When the protagonist begins without full knowledge, the audience learns alongside him. This creates alignment. The viewer is not ahead of the character. They are discovering together. This shared discovery builds engagement naturally. It creates curiosity loops throughout the story. As the mission progresses, the tension does not rely on constant explosions. Instead, it builds through uncertainty. Will the calculations work? Will the system respond correctly? Will the scientific hypothesis prove accurate? That type of tension is slower but more intellectually engaging. It respects the audience. And that respect is part of why expectations for Project Hail Mary are so high. The story also explores sacrifice, not just physical sacrifice, but emotional sacrifice. Being far from Earth means giving up familiarity, relationships, comfort, and certainty. It forces the character to confront loneliness in its purest form, but instead of breaking him, that loneliness reshapes him. It strengthens resolve. It clarifies purpose. In many ways, the film becomes a journey from confusion to clarity, from isolation to connection, from fear to cooperation. If we analyze it from a broader cinematic history perspective, this type of science-driven emotional storytelling stands alongside some of the most respected works in modern sci-fi. It represents a trend where audiences want intelligent narratives that still deliver spectacle, not empty spectacle, but meaningful spectacle. The combination of real science, emotional depth, strong character arcs, and cross-species cooperation gives the film long-term potential. It can appeal to science enthusiasts, general movie audiences, and people who simply love emotionally satisfying journeys. Ultimately, the lasting impression of Project Hail Mary is likely to be its optimism, not naive optimism, but earned optimism. Optimism that survives struggle, hope that survives doubt, friendship that survives difference. And that kind of storytelling doesn't just entertain for 2 hours, it influences how audiences think about cooperation, problem solving, and the universe itself.
As we proceed further into the intricate layers of Project Hail Mary, it becomes evident that the story's enduring power derives not only from its interstellar stakes or scientifically plausible problem-solving, but from its profound exploration of human cognition under extreme conditions. Because the protagonist's journey exemplifies how intelligence functions most effectively when coupled with emotional regulation, ethical decision-making, and reflective insight. And as Grace confronts the existential threat posed by the astrophage organism, he must repeatedly negotiate between rapid analytical reasoning and careful moral judgment, demonstrating that the act of survival is as much a test of character as it is a test of intellect, while simultaneously the narrative constructs a reflective space for the audience to internalize these lessons. Because every discovery Grace makes, every hypothesis he tests, and every failed experiment functions as a conduit for viewers to contemplate the nature of problem-solving in high-stakes scenarios. And the film cleverly aligns audience perception with his own mental processing by gradually revealing the information he regains from memory and the external data he observes, creating a continuous feedback loop that mirrors cognitive learning and reinforces engagement on both intellectual and emotional levels. And in parallel, the interspecies relationship with Rocky extends this dynamic into a social and philosophical dimension, because Rocky embodies an intelligence that is both alien and highly structured, forcing Grace, and by extension the audience, to recognize the value of alternative perspectives, the utility of observation and pattern recognition in communication, and the necessity of humility when confronted with systems or beings whose logic and perception differ fundamentally from our own. And through repeated cooperative problem-solving sequences, the story emphasizes that collaboration across difference is not optional, but essential for survival. And this principle resonates beyond the diegetic world, suggesting broader reflections on global cooperation, interdisciplinary research, and intercultural understanding, while also enriching the emotional texture of the narrative, because the audience witnesses genuine trust-building, shared risk-taking, and mutual reliance develop organically, elevating what could have been a sterile, science-driven plot into a rich tapestry of humanistic storytelling. And the meticulous attention to scientific realism amplifies this effect, as the depiction of astrophage, its life cycle,
energy absorption mechanisms, and interaction with stellar physics is handled with such precision that viewers are invited not merely to suspend disbelief, but to intellectually simulate the scenario, enhancing immersion and reinforcing the credibility of the protagonist's challenges and triumphs. And this blending of accuracy and narrative function is mirrored in the spacecraft environment, where constrained space, limited resources, and environmental hazards all function simultaneously as plot devices, character tests, and thematic symbols, because the microcosm of the vessel reflects Grace's internal state, his problem-solving process, and the narrative's broader meditation on isolation, responsibility, and perseverance. And as the story progresses, the pacing alternates between moments of intense analytical tension, reflective silence, and emergent discovery, mirroring cognitive rhythms of focus and processing, while visual design reinforces these narrative beats through careful composition, contrasting the infinite emptiness of space with the confined, detail-rich interior of the spacecraft, utilizing light, shadow, and scale to communicate vulnerability, significance, and the scope of the protagonist's challenge. And alongside these aesthetic considerations, the auditory design employs silence, subtle tonal cues, and selective sound motifs to heighten tension, underscore emotional beats, and create an immersive environment in which every sound or lack thereof conveys meaning, while the performance requirements on Ryan Gosling remain profound, demanding that subtle facial micro-expressions, posture shifts, and restrained vocal inflections communicate as much as dialogue, ensuring that the emotional and cognitive layers of the story are faithfully transmitted. And simultaneously, the narrative structure reinforces rewatch value, because the careful layering of clues, foreshadowing, and scientific exposition encourages viewers to revisit sequences, discover previously overlooked details, and develop their own hypotheses, thus transforming a single viewing experience into a participatory analytical engagement. And thematically, the story operates on multiple simultaneous frequencies, conveying that curiosity, adaptability, and empathy are not merely personal virtues, but systemic imperatives that govern survival at planetary, interstellar, and cognitive scales, emphasizing that the ability to negotiate uncertainty, build trust, and learn iteratively is more critical than brute force or isolated intelligence. And culturally, the story situates itself within a landscape of contemporary science fiction that increasingly values realism, intellectual engagement, and emotional resonance over spectacle alone, setting a potential benchmark for future narrative design that prioritizes both depth and accessibility. And this layered complexity is further reinforced by subtle symbolism, where every element, from the spacecraft interior to the patterns of astrophage movement, from the physical gestures of Grace and Rocky to the visual composition of starfields, functions simultaneously as plot device, character reflection, and thematic metaphor, ultimately crafting an ecosystem of meaning in which narrative, character, science, philosophy, and emotion are interwoven into a single immersive experience. And in considering the enduring significance of Project Hail Mary, one recognizes that its resonance lies not in temporary spectacle, but in its ability to integrate intellectual stimulation, emotional investment, and philosophical reflection, offering audiences a narrative that is simultaneously thrilling, moving, and thought-provoking, with implications that extend beyond the film's runtime into considerations of human cognition, ethical decision-making, collaborative problem-solving, and the profound potential of empathy and curiosity as drivers of survival, progress, and interconnection, while also functioning as a case study in cinematic craftsmanship, with layered visual composition, sound design, pacing, and performance that collectively elevate the story into a model of how science fiction can meaningfully engage the mind, heart, and imagination at once, creating a work whose potential for long-term cultural, educational, and entertainment influence is as vast and enduring as the universe it depicts, leaving the audience with not only an exhilarating narrative journey, but a reflective meditation on the qualities that define intelligence, resilience, and cooperation in the face of incomprehensible challenges.
Continuing the exploration of Project Hail Mary, the deeper significance of the story emerges when we analyze how it reframes the concept of intelligence itself. Because in many traditional narratives, intelligence is portrayed as dominance, strategic superiority, or technological control. Yet here, intelligence is expressed as patience, experimentation, humility, and the willingness to admit uncertainty. And this subtle shift changes the moral foundation of the entire story, transforming it into a celebration of collaborative thinking rather than individual conquest, while also reinforcing the idea that scientific progress is inherently cooperative, built on shared knowledge, collective effort, and incremental discovery. And this cooperative framework is mirrored in the evolving partnership between Ryland Grace and Rocky, whose relationship symbolizes the possibility of harmony between vastly different systems of life, suggesting that communication is not limited to shared language, but can be constructed through persistence, pattern recognition, and mutual intent. And this representation of interspecies trust becomes one of the film's most emotionally resonant elements, because it challenges the assumption that fear must dominate encounters with the unknown, replacing confrontation with curiosity. And in doing so, the narrative expands the emotional vocabulary of science fiction, presenting empathy as a survival mechanism rather than a sentimental accessory. While the memory loss structure continues to function as both a narrative hook and a psychological mirror, reflecting the human experience of rediscovering purpose after confusion, reinforcing resilience as a core theme. And as the protagonist gradually reconstructs his understanding of the mission, the audience experiences parallel cognitive satisfaction, because each recovered detail feels earned and meaningful, enhancing engagement through structured revelation rather than random exposition. And from a filmmaking perspective, this technique supports long-form storytelling, allowing tension to build organically through incremental disclosure, which strengthens pacing and prevents fatigue in a high-stakes narrative. While visually, the film's reliance on spatial contrast between the emptiness of the cosmos and the confined interior of the spacecraft serves as a metaphor for internal versus external exploration, highlighting how solitude can lead to self-awareness and how vast environments can sharpen focus. And in terms of performance demands, the central role requires controlled emotional expression, subtle physicality, and precise vocal modulation, because much of the narrative depends on internal transformation rather than external interaction. And this creates an opportunity for nuanced acting that prioritizes authenticity over exaggeration, aligning with the grounded tone established by the source material originally developed by Andy Weir, whose approach to science-driven storytelling emphasizes realism, problem-solving logic, and incremental progress, thereby ensuring that tension arises naturally from constraints rather than artificial conflict. And this method of storytelling enhances credibility, which in turn increases audience investment, because when viewers believe the science could plausibly work, they feel emotionally connected to the outcome.
And beyond entertainment value, the story carries philosophical implications about cooperation as a universal survival strategy, proposing that intelligence across species, cultures, or disciplines shares a common foundation of adaptability and curiosity. And this broader message positions the film as both a cinematic experience and a conceptual exploration of humanity's place within a vast and uncertain universe, encouraging reflection on resilience, discovery, and shared responsibility. While its blend of suspense, humor, scientific rigor, and emotional bonding creates a multi-dimensional narrative architecture capable of appealing to diverse audiences, from science enthusiasts to general viewers seeking meaningful storytelling. And ultimately, the enduring appeal of Project Hail Mary lies in its balance between scale and intimacy, between cosmic threat and personal growth, between isolation and partnership, forming a cohesive story that demonstrates how even in the most extreme environments, progress is achieved not through dominance but through understanding, not through fear but through collaboration, and not through isolation but through connection, leaving the audience with a sense of hope that extends beyond the screen and into broader contemplation of how cooperation and curiosity can shape the future of both fiction and reality. As the conceptual framework of Project Hail Mary expands further, another important dimension emerges: the psychology of isolation in extreme environments. Long-term solitude in space alters perception, time awareness, emotional regulation, and cognitive processing. By placing the protagonist in near total isolation at the beginning, the story explores how the human mind reconstructs purpose when external social structures are removed. In such conditions, motivation must become internally generated rather than socially reinforced. This transforms the narrative into a study of self-driven resilience. The character does not survive because others command him to act. He survives because he consciously chooses responsibility. Furthermore, the film's narrative design uses progressive revelation rather than immediate exposition. This technique mirrors real scientific discovery. Knowledge is not delivered in a single moment. It accumulates gradually through observation, testing, correction, and refinement. That structure gives the audience a sense of participation because viewers are not passive receivers of information, but active interpreters of clues. Each discovery feels earned. This reinforces engagement and enhances intellectual satisfaction. Another significant element is the thematic contrast between fear and curiosity. In many crisis-based stories, fear dominates decision-making. Here, curiosity becomes the primary survival engine. Curiosity drives experimentation. Experimentation drives solutions. Solutions drive survival. This chain reaction demonstrates how intellectual openness can outperform emotional panic. It subtly reframes courage not as aggression, but as willingness to explore uncertainty. The relationship between Ryland Grace and Rocky also introduces a structural innovation in modern science fiction storytelling: symmetrical problem solving. Both characters contribute uniquely based on their species-specific strengths. Neither dominates, neither is secondary. Their cooperation forms a balanced system. This narrative equality reinforces the message that progress emerges from complementary abilities rather than hierarchical control. And in doing so, the film moves away from traditional hero-centric storytelling towards partnership-centric storytelling. From a world-building perspective, the astrophysical threat central to the story creates a credible existential framework. Instead of relying on abstract villainy, the conflict arises from natural phenomena amplified by scientific discovery. This grounding in plausible science strengthens immersion. Viewers can intellectually engage with the problem because it follows logical rules rather than fantasy conventions. Emotionally, the film's structure encourages gradual attachment. Instead of overwhelming audiences with constant spectacle, it develops bonds through shared problem-solving and vulnerability. Emotional stakes rise as trust builds. That trust becomes the true core of tension. If collaboration fails, survival fails. This relational dependency increases narrative depth. On a broader cultural level, stories like this influence how audiences imagine the future. When science fiction emphasizes cooperation, problem-solving, and cross-cultural communication, it shapes expectations about humanity's trajectory. Rather than presenting a dystopian vision of inevitable collapse, the narrative presents a model of adaptive success. This optimistic framework can subtly influence how viewers think about global challenges, technological development, and scientific research. Another important aspect is the integration of humor within high-stakes scenarios. Controlled humor reduces cognitive fatigue and increases emotional balance. It allows audiences to remain engaged during technically complex sequences. When used strategically,
The alien character Rocky introduces one of the most significant narrative expansions in modern science fiction: non-human perspective as equal intelligence. Instead of portraying the alien as a threat or a background element, the story treats it as a collaborator. This choice shifts the emotional center of the narrative. It transforms the film from a human versus universe story into a partnership story. That shift changes everything about tone and meaning. Visually and technically, space-based storytelling demands precision. Lighting must reflect realism. Sound design must respect vacuum physics. Silence becomes meaningful. In space, sound does not travel naturally, so cinematic audio choices must be intentional. This creates opportunities for atmospheric immersion that few other genres can provide. Performance demands are also unusually high. Because much of the story unfolds in isolated environments, subtle facial expressions and controlled vocal delivery become critical storytelling tools. Emotional intensity cannot rely on constant interaction. It must be conveyed through internal transformation. That kind of performance elevates character-driven cinema. From a genre perspective, Project Hail Mary blends hardcore science fiction with emotional drama and light comedic elements. This hybrid structure expands audience reach. Hardcore science fans appreciate the realism. General audiences connect with character growth. Emotional viewers engage with friendship themes. That cross-genre appeal increases cultural potential. Another important dimension is hope. Many contemporary sci-fi narratives lean toward dystopian outcomes. This story instead emphasizes cooperation and problem-solving as solutions to existential threats. That hopeful orientation can significantly influence audience perception, especially in times when global uncertainty is high. Stories that model collaboration can subtly shape social imagination. The relationship dynamic between the two main characters also serves as a metaphor for interdisciplinary cooperation. Just as two different species must exchange knowledge to survive, real-world challenges often require collaboration across cultures, disciplines, and perspectives. The film's structure mirrors that idea through its plot mechanics. In terms of long-term legacy, films that combine scientific integrity with emotional storytelling often maintain relevance longer than spectacle-driven productions. Because their value lies in ideas rather than only visuals, they continue to generate discussion, analysis, and reinterpretation over time. Additionally, the story's focus on curiosity as a survival tool reinforces a powerful message. Exploration is not optional, it is essential. Whether exploring space, science, or relationships, progress depends on asking questions and remaining open to new information. The cumulative effect of all these elements is a narrative that feels both intimate and expansive. Intimate because it focuses deeply on character transformation. Expansive because it spans interstellar distances and existential stakes. That contrast is one of the film's strongest artistic qualities. As we proceed further into the intricate layers of Project Hail Mary, it becomes evident that the story's enduring power derives not only from its interstellar stakes or scientifically plausible problem-solving, but from its profound exploration of human cognition under extreme conditions. Because the protagonist's journey exemplifies how intelligence functions most effectively when coupled with emotional regulation, ethical decision-making, and reflective insight. And as Grace confronts the existential threat posed by the astrophage organism, he must repeatedly negotiate between rapid analytical reasoning and careful moral judgment, demonstrating that the act of survival is as much a test of character as it is a test of intellect. While simultaneously, the narrative constructs a reflective space for the audience to internalize these lessons. Because every discovery Grace makes, every hypothesis he tests, and every failed experiment functions as a conduit for viewers to contemplate the nature of problem-solving in high-stakes scenarios. And the film cleverly aligns audience perception with his own mental processing by gradually revealing the information he regains from memory and the external data he observes, creating a continuous feedback loop that mirrors cognitive learning and reinforces engagement on both intellectual and emotional levels. And, in parallel, the interspecies relationship with Rocky extends this dynamic into a social and philosophical dimension, because Rocky embodies an intelligence that is both alien and highly structured, forcing Grace, and by extension the audience, to recognize the value of alternative perspectives, the utility of observation and pattern recognition in communication, and the necessity of humility when confronted with systems or beings whose logic and perception differ fundamentally from our own. And through repeated cooperative problem-solving sequences, the story emphasizes that collaboration across difference is not optional but essential. This principle resonates beyond the diegetic world, suggesting broader reflections on global cooperation, interdisciplinary research, and intercultural understanding, while also enriching the emotional texture of the narrative, because the audience witnesses genuine trust-building, shared risk-taking, and mutual reliance develop organically, elevating what could have been a sterile science-driven plot into a rich tapestry of humanistic storytelling. And the meticulous attention to scientific realism amplifies this effect, as the depiction of astrophage, its life cycle, energy absorption mechanisms, and interaction with stellar physics is handled with such precision that viewers are invited not merely to suspend disbelief, but intellectually simulate the scenario, enhancing immersion and reinforcing the credibility of the protagonist's challenges and triumphs. And this blending of accuracy and narrative function is mirrored in the spacecraft environment, where constrained space, limited resources, and environmental hazards all function simultaneously as plot devices, character tests, and thematic symbols. Because the microcosm of the vessel reflects Grace's internal state, his problem-solving process, and the narrative's broader meditation on isolation, responsibility, and perseverance. And as the story progresses, the pacing alternates between moments of intense analytical tension, reflective silence, and emergent discovery, mirroring cognitive rhythms of focus and processing, while visual design reinforces these narrative beats through careful composition, contrasting the infinite emptiness of space with the confined, detail-rich interior of the spacecraft, utilizing light, shadow, and scale to communicate vulnerability, significance, and the scope of the protagonist's challenge. And alongside these aesthetic considerations, the auditory design employs silence, subtle tonal cues, and selective sound motifs to heighten tension, underscore emotional beats, and create an immersive environment in which every sound or lack thereof conveys meaning. While the performance requirements on Ryan Gosling remain profound, demanding that subtle facial micro-expressions, posture shifts, and restrained vocal inflections communicate as much as dialogue, ensuring that the emotional and cognitive layers of the story are faithfully transmitted. And simultaneously, the narrative structure reinforces rewatch value, because the careful layering of clues, foreshadowing, and scientific exposition encourages viewers to revisit sequences, discover previously overlooked details, and develop their own hypotheses, thus transforming a single viewing experience into a participatory analytical engagement. Thematically, the story operates on multiple simultaneous frequencies, conveying that curiosity, adaptability, and empathy are not merely personal virtues, but systemic imperatives that govern survival at planetary, interstellar, and cognitive levels, emphasizing that the ability to negotiate uncertainty, build trust, and learn iteratively is more critical than brute force or isolated intelligence. Culturally, the story situates itself within a landscape of contemporary science fiction that increasingly values realism, intellectual engagement, and emotional resonance over spectacle alone, setting a potential benchmark for future narrative design that prioritizes both depth and accessibility. And this layered complexity is further reinforced by subtle symbolism, where every element, from the spacecraft interior to the patterns of astrophage movement, from the physical gestures of Grace and Rocky to the visual composition of star fields, functions simultaneously as plot device, character reflection, and thematic metaphor, ultimately crafting an ecosystem of meaning in which narrative, character.
Now, looking beyond plot summaries and surface-level excitement, Project Hail Mary represents a rare type of modern blockbuster, one that combines intellectual rigor with emotional storytelling in a way that respects the audience's intelligence. In an era where many films prioritize speed over substance, this story stands out because it slows down at the right moments, allowing science, silence, and reflection to become part of the drama. That creative decision alone changes the viewing experience from passive entertainment into active engagement. The core emotional engine of the film is isolation, not just physical isolation in space, but psychological isolation, the feeling of being the only one who understands the scale of a problem. That theme resonates universally. Even in everyday life, people experience moments where they feel alone in their responsibilities, their ideas, or their struggles. By amplifying that feeling to a cosmic scale, the story turns a personal emotion into a universal experience. At the same time, the narrative gradually replaces isolation with collaboration. This transformation is not rushed, it is earned. The communication between Ryland Grace and Rocky evolves step by step, reflecting patience and intellectual humility. Neither character dominates the other. Instead, both adapt. That mutual adaptation symbolizes one of the most powerful ideas in the film. Progress requires flexibility.
From a character development standpoint, Grace's journey follows a subtle but important arc. He begins in confusion, moves into problem-solving mode, confronts fear, embraces responsibility, and ultimately accepts sacrifice. This arc feels realistic because it mirrors how humans process large-scale challenges. First denial, then understanding, then action, then commitment. The scientific foundation of the story adds credibility. Rather than using vague, futuristic technology as a shortcut, the narrative grounds its solutions in plausible physics and biology. This approach builds trust with the audience. When viewers believe the science could work, the stakes feel real. That realism increases tension without needing constant action sequences. Another important layer is tone control. The film balances seriousness with moments of warmth and humor. That balance prevents emotional fatigue. In long narratives, especially those dealing with extinction-level stakes, audiences need relief. Without it, tension becomes overwhelming. By introducing character-driven lighter moments, the story maintains engagement while preserving stakes. Cinematically, space as a setting provides both beauty and danger. The emptiness emphasizes vulnerability. The vastness highlights insignificance. Yet visually, space also offers opportunity, stunning imagery, scale contrast, and immersive design. That contrast between danger and beauty strengthens the viewing experience. From a cultural perspective, stories like Project Hail Mary arrive at a time when audiences crave intelligent optimism. Many modern narratives lean heavily into dystopia. This story, however, suggests that collaboration and curiosity can overcome catastrophic threats. That hopeful message may contribute significantly to its long-term impact. The relationship between Grace and Rocky also challenges traditional storytelling conventions. In most mainstream films, conflict drives narrative. Here, cooperation drives narrative. That shift alone is innovative. It redefines what tension can look like. Instead of fighting each other, characters fight together against a shared problem. Emotionally, the film is structured around discovery. Discovery of identity, discovery of scientific solutions, discovery of friendship, discovery of purpose. Each discovery moves the story forward. This layered discovery structure keeps audiences intellectually stimulated while emotionally invested. Performance expectations remain high, especially for Ryan Gosling, because much of the film relies on subtle expression rather than dialogue-heavy scenes. That kind of role requires controlled intensity. It is less about shouting emotions and more about internal transformation. In terms of legacy potential, if executed successfully, Project Hail Mary could become a reference point in science fiction, similar to how certain films redefine subgenres. Its combination of hard science, emotional storytelling, alien friendship, and survival themes gives it strong academic and fan discussion potential. It may also inspire discussions in educational contexts, particularly because of its scientific elements. When fiction encourages curiosity about real science, it extends its influence beyond entertainment. Ultimately, what makes this story powerful is not just its scale, but its message. Intelligence plus empathy equals survival. Knowledge alone is not enough. Strength alone is not enough. Cooperation is essential. That idea resonates deeply in a universe that feels infinite and uncertain.
When we examine Project Hail Mary from a storytelling architecture perspective, what stands out immediately is its dual-layer narrative design. On the surface, it is a survival mission across interstellar space, but underneath, it operates as a story about reconstruction of memory, identity, trust, and cooperation. This layered storytelling allows the film to function at multiple intellectual frequencies at once, appealing to casual viewers and analytical audiences simultaneously. The memory loss device at the beginning is not just a plot twist, it's a structural strategy. By placing the audience in the same informational position as the protagonist, the narrative creates alignment. That alignment increases immersion because the viewer experiences discovery in real time. That shared uncertainty builds engagement organically without relying on artificial suspense techniques. Another major structural strength is the balance between micro-level problem-solving and macro-level consequences. On the micro level, the protagonist solves immediate technical challenges inside the spacecraft. On the macro level, those solutions affect the survival of an entire planet. This scaling effect creates tension because small actions carry enormous consequences. The audience understands that even a minor scientific breakthrough can shift the fate of humanity. From a thematic standpoint, the story heavily emphasizes adaptability. Both human and alien characters must adjust their assumptions in order to cooperate. This theme reflects a broader philosophical idea. Progress requires flexibility. In complex environments, rigid thinking leads to failure. Adaptive thinking leads to survival. That principle applies both in the film's universe and in real-world innovation.
Continuing further into the conceptual depth of Project Hail Mary, one of the most fascinating aspects arises when we interpret the narrative as a study of time perception under extreme isolation. Because when a human is removed from natural cycles such as day and night, social interaction, and environmental variation, time no longer behaves as a stable external structure, but becomes a subjective internal construct shaped by cognition, routine, and mental engagement. And within this context, the protagonist's experience of time likely fluctuates between rapid compression during intense problem-solving sequences and prolonged expansion during moments of uncertainty or waiting. And this distortion of time perception adds a subtle psychological layer to the narrative, reinforcing the idea that survival in space is not only a physical and intellectual challenge, but also a temporal one, where maintaining a consistent sense of progression is essential for mental stability. And this links directly to the concept of routine as a stabilizing force, because in environments lacking external structure, self-imposed routines become critical for preserving cognitive clarity, emotional balance, and decision-making efficiency. And the establishment of routines transforms chaos into order, enabling sustained focus and reducing the risk of psychological deterioration, while simultaneously reinforcing the protagonist's sense of agency and control. And this control becomes a central pillar of resilience as it counteracts the overwhelming scale of the external threat. And when we extend this analysis into the realm of survival ethics, the story presents complex moral questions regarding sacrifice, prioritization, and the value of individual versus collective life. Because the mission itself inherently involves risk at an extreme scale, requiring decisions that may determine the fate of entire populations. And these ethical dilemmas are not presented as abstract philosophical debates, but as immediate practical challenges that must be resolved under pressure, highlighting the difficulty of applying moral frameworks in situations where outcomes are uncertain and stakes are absolute. And this tension between ethical idealism and pragmatic necessity adds depth to the narrative, encouraging viewers to reflect on how they might respond under similar circumstances. And further expanding into the philosophy of intelligence, the interaction between the human protagonist and Rocky challenges anthropocentric definitions of intelligence, because intelligence is revealed to be context-dependent, adaptive, and multifaceted, rather than fixed or hierarchical. And through their collaboration, the story demonstrates that different forms of intelligence can complement each other in ways that exceed the capabilities of any single system, suggesting that the future of survival, whether in fiction or reality, lies in the integration of diverse cognitive approaches rather than the dominance of one over others. And this idea connects to broader considerations of human evolution, as the narrative implies that adaptability, cooperation, and continuous learning are the traits most likely to ensure long-term survival in unpredictable environments. And by placing these themes within a high-stakes interstellar scenario, the story magnifies their importance while maintaining accessibility through character-driven storytelling. And from a cinematic perspective, these philosophical elements can be reinforced through visual and auditory techniques that subtly influence audience perception, such as the use of silence to emphasize isolation, the gradual introduction of sound patterns associated with communication and understanding, and the manipulation of visual rhythm to reflect changes in cognitive state, creating an immersive experience that operates on both conscious and subconscious levels. And in terms of narrative longevity, stories that integrate scientific plausibility with philosophical depth tend to generate sustained engagement because they invite analysis, reinterpretation, and discussion, allowing audiences to extract new meaning with each viewing. And this capacity for layered interpretation contributes to cultural endurance, as the story remains relevant across different contexts and time periods. And ultimately, the enduring significance of Project Hail Mary lies in its ability to merge survival, science, psychology, and philosophy into a cohesive narrative that not only entertains but also challenges the audience to reconsider fundamental assumptions about intelligence, cooperation, time, and the nature of human potential, leaving behind not just a memorable story, but a framework for thinking about how life, in all its forms, navigates the unknown.
Continuing further into the analytical depth of Project Hail Mary, another critical dimension emerges when we examine the narrative through the lens of decision-making under uncertainty. Because the protagonist is consistently forced to act without complete information, and this reflects one of the most fundamental realities of both science and life, where decisions are rarely made with perfect data and instead rely on probabilistic reasoning, intuition shaped by knowledge, and the willingness to accept risk. And this uncertainty-driven framework creates a persistent cognitive tension that keeps the audience mentally engaged, since every choice carries potential consequences that are not immediately predictable. And this unpredictability enhances suspense not through artificial danger, but through realistic complexity, while simultaneously reinforcing the intellectual authenticity of the story. And in this context, failure becomes not only inevitable, but necessary, because each failed attempt refines understanding and narrows the path toward a viable solution. And this iterative process reflects the philosophy that progress is constructed through accumulated error correction rather than flawless execution, a concept deeply rooted in real scientific advancement. And by embedding this principle into the core structure of the narrative, the film subtly educates the audience about the nature of discovery, transforming entertainment into an experience that also expands cognitive perspective. And alongside this, the theme of responsibility operates on multiple levels, because the protagonist is not only responsible for his own survival, but for the survival of an entire planet. And this scale of responsibility introduces psychological pressure that influences behavior, decision-making, and emotional stability. Yet instead of collapsing under this pressure, the character gradually adapts, demonstrating how humans can expand their capacity for responsibility when circumstances demand it. And this expansion of capacity becomes a central message of the story, suggesting that potential is not fixed but can grow under necessity, while the presence of Rocky introduces a complementary dimension of shared responsibility, where both characters depend on each other's knowledge and capabilities, reinforcing the idea that distributed responsibility can reduce individual burden while increasing collective effectiveness. And this balance between individual accountability and collaborative support forms a stable system that enables survival in otherwise impossible conditions. And from a narrative engineering perspective, this creates a dual-layer structure, where internal growth and external cooperation evolve in parallel, strengthening the overall coherence of the story. And visually, this evolution can be represented through subtle environmental changes within the spacecraft, adjustments in lighting, organization, and interaction patterns that reflect the protagonist's shifting mindset and increasing control over his environment. And such visual storytelling techniques enhance immersion by allowing the audience to perceive change without explicit explanation, while the pacing continues to rely on controlled variation between high-intensity problem-solving sequences and quieter reflective moments, which prevents cognitive overload and maintains long-term engagement. And in terms of thematic expansion, the story also explores the concept of knowledge as survival currency, where information becomes more valuable than physical strength or material resources, and the ability to understand, interpret, and apply knowledge determines outcomes, emphasizing the importance of education, curiosity, and continuous learning. And this aligns closely with the narrative origins developed by Andy Weir, whose storytelling approach consistently prioritizes logic-driven progression and realistic scientific challenges, ensuring that solutions feel earned rather than convenient. And this approach not only enhances credibility, but also builds audience trust, because viewers recognize that the narrative respects their intelligence. And this respect creates a stronger emotional and intellectual bond between the story and its audience. And as we consider the broader implications, the film's emphasis on cooperation, adaptability, and problem-solving positions it as a reflection of contemporary global challenges, where complex issues such as climate change, technological risk, and resource management require collaborative solutions informed by science. And by presenting these ideas within an engaging narrative framework, the story becomes both entertaining and thought-provoking, encouraging viewers to reflect on real-world parallels without feeling didactic. And this balance between narrative engagement and thematic depth is one of the defining strengths of Project Hail Mary, allowing it to function simultaneously as a compelling cinematic experience and a conceptual exploration of human potential, resilience, and the power of shared intelligence in the face of overwhelming uncertainty, ultimately reinforcing the idea that survival, whether on a planetary scale or a personal level, is driven not by isolation or dominance, but by understanding, cooperation, and the continuous pursuit of knowledge. Continuing deeper into the interpretive landscape of Project Hail Mary, another powerful analytical angle emerges when we examine the narrative as a model of cognitive load management under extreme pressure, because the protagonist is constantly required to balance multiple streams of information, including environmental data, experimental results, memory reconstruction, and emotional regulation. And this simultaneous processing creates a high cognitive load that must be carefully managed to avoid overload, errors, or breakdown.
and the story implicitly demonstrates strategies for handling such complexity, including prioritization, chunking of information, iterative focus, and the delegation of tasks through collaboration with Rocky. And this makes the narrative not only engaging, but also instructive, as it reflects real-world principles used in high-stakes fields such as aerospace engineering, medicine, and crisis management, where decision-makers must filter relevant data from noise and act efficiently under time constraints. And by embedding these principles within a dramatic context, the story allows audiences to intuitively understand complex cognitive processes without requiring formal technical knowledge, while simultaneously maintaining tension through the constant risk of miscalculation or oversight. And alongside cognitive load, the theme of uncertainty tolerance becomes increasingly significant, because the protagonist must operate without guarantees of success, and this requires a mindset that accepts ambiguity as a permanent condition rather than a temporary obstacle. And this adaptation is essential for survival in unpredictable environments.
Continuing the exploration of Project Hail Mary, the deeper significance of the story emerges when we analyze how it reframes the concept of intelligence itself. Because in many traditional narratives, intelligence is portrayed as dominance, strategic superiority, or technological control. Yet here, intelligence is expressed as patience, experimentation, humility, and the willingness to admit uncertainty. And this subtle shift changes the moral foundation of the entire story, transforming it into a celebration of collaborative thinking rather than individual conquest, while also reinforcing the idea that scientific progress is inherently cooperative, built on shared knowledge, collective effort, and incremental discovery. And this cooperative framework is mirrored in the evolving partnership between Ryland Grace and Rocky, whose relationship symbolizes the possibility of harmony between vastly different systems of life, suggesting that communication is not limited to shared language, but can be constructed through persistence, pattern recognition, and mutual intent. And this representation of interspecies trust becomes one of the film's most emotionally resonant elements, because it challenges the assumption that fear must dominate encounters with the unknown, replacing confrontation with curiosity. And in doing so, the narrative expands the emotional vocabulary of science fiction, presenting empathy as a survival mechanism rather than a sentimental accessory. While the memory loss structure continues to function as both a narrative hook and a psychological mirror, reflecting the human experience of rediscovering purpose after confusion, reinforcing resilience as a core theme. And as the protagonist gradually reconstructs his understanding of the mission, the audience experiences parallel cognitive satisfaction, because each recovered detail feels earned and meaningful, enhancing engagement through structured revelation rather than random exposition. And from a filmmaking perspective, this technique supports long-form storytelling, allowing tension to build organically through incremental disclosure, which strengthens pacing and prevents fatigue in a high-stakes narrative. While visually, the film's reliance on spatial contrast between the emptiness of the cosmos and the confined interior of the spacecraft serves as a metaphor for internal versus external exploration, highlighting how solitude can lead to self-awareness and how vast environments can sharpen focus. And in terms of performance demands, the central role requires controlled emotional expression, subtle physicality, and precise vocal modulation, because much of the narrative depends on internal transformation rather than external interaction. And this creates an opportunity for nuanced acting that prioritizes authenticity over exaggeration, aligning with the grounded tone established by the source material
originally developed by Andy Weir, whose approach to science-driven storytelling emphasizes realism, problem-solving logic, and incremental progress, thereby ensuring that tension arises naturally from constraints rather than artificial conflict. And this method of storytelling enhances credibility, which in turn increases audience investment, because when viewers believe the science could plausibly work, they feel emotionally connected to the outcome. And beyond entertainment value, the story carries philosophical implications about cooperation as a universal survival strategy, proposing that intelligence across species, cultures, or disciplines shares a common foundation of adaptability and curiosity. And this broader message positions the film as both a cinematic experience and a conceptual exploration of humanity's place within a vast and uncertain universe, encouraging reflection on resilience, discovery, and shared responsibility, while its blend of suspense, humor, scientific rigor, and emotional bonding creates a multi-dimensional narrative architecture capable of appealing to diverse audiences, from science enthusiasts to general viewers seeking meaningful storytelling. And ultimately, the enduring appeal of Project Hail Mary lies in its balance between scale and intimacy, between cosmic threat and personal growth, between isolation and partnership, forming a cohesive story that demonstrates how even in the most extreme environments, progress is achieved not through dominance, but through understanding, not through fear, but through collaboration, and not through isolation, but through connection, leaving the audience with a sense of hope that extends beyond the screen and into broader contemplation of how cooperation and curiosity can shape the future of both fiction and reality. As the conceptual framework of Project Hail Mary expands further, another important dimension emerges: the psychology of isolation in extreme environments. Long-term solitude in space alters perception, time awareness, emotional regulation, and cognitive processing. By placing the protagonist in near total isolation at the beginning, the story explores how the human mind reconstructs purpose when external social structures are removed. In such conditions, motivation must become internally generated rather than socially reinforced. This transforms the narrative into a study of self-driven resilience. The character does not survive because others command him to act. He survives because he consciously chooses responsibility. Furthermore, the film's narrative design uses progressive revelation rather than immediate exposition. This technique mirrors real scientific discovery. Knowledge is not delivered in a single moment. It accumulates gradually through observation, testing, correction, and refinement. That structure gives the audience a sense of participation because viewers are not passive receivers of information, but active interpreters of clues. Each discovery feels earned. This reinforces engagement and enhances intellectual satisfaction. Another significant element is the thematic contrast between fear and curiosity. In many crisis-based stories, fear dominates decision-making. Here, curiosity becomes the primary survival engine. Curiosity drives experimentation. Experimentation drives solutions. Solutions drive survival. This chain reaction demonstrates how intellectual openness can outperform emotional panic. It subtly reframes courage not as aggression, but as willingness to explore uncertainty. The relationship between Ryland Grace and Rocky also introduces a structural innovation in modern science fiction storytelling: symmetrical problem solving. Both characters contribute uniquely based on their species-specific strengths. Neither dominates, neither is secondary. Their cooperation forms a balanced system. This narrative equality reinforces the message that progress emerges from complementary abilities rather than hierarchical control. And in doing so, the film moves away from traditional hero-centric storytelling towards partnership-centric storytelling. From a world-building perspective, the astrophysical threat central to the story creates a credible existential framework. Instead of relying on abstract villainy, the conflict arises from natural phenomena amplified by scientific discovery. This grounding in plausible science strengthens immersion. Viewers can intellectually engage with the problem because it follows logical rules rather than fantasy conventions. Emotionally, the film's structure encourages gradual attachment. Instead of overwhelming audiences with constant spectacle, it develops bonds through shared problem-solving and vulnerability. Emotional stakes rise as trust builds. That trust becomes the true core of tension. If collaboration fails, survival fails. This relational dependency increases narrative depth. On a broader cultural level, stories like this influence how audiences imagine the future. When science fiction emphasizes cooperation, problem-solving, and cross-cultural communication, it shapes expectations about humanity's trajectory. Rather than presenting a dystopian vision of inevitable collapse, the narrative presents a model of adaptive success. This optimistic framework can subtly influence how viewers think about global challenges, technological development, and scientific research. Another important aspect is the integration of humor within high-stakes scenarios. Controlled humor reduces cognitive fatigue and increases emotional balance. It allows audiences to remain engaged during technically complex sequences. When used strategically,
and it reflects a broader human capability to function under conditions of partial knowledge, which is increasingly relevant in a rapidly changing world. And when we consider the narrative's treatment of knowledge itself, it becomes clear that knowledge is portrayed not as static information, but as a dynamic process that evolves through interaction, experimentation, and feedback. And this process-oriented view aligns with modern scientific philosophy, emphasizing that understanding is never complete, but always expanding. And this reinforces the importance of curiosity as a driving force, because curiosity initiates exploration, exploration generates data, and data enables progress, forming a continuous loop that sustains both the narrative and the protagonist's survival. And within this loop, failure is reframed as an essential component rather than a setback, because each unsuccessful attempt contributes to a more refined understanding of the problem space. And this perspective encourages resilience by normalizing error as part of growth. And as the collaboration between the human protagonist and Rocky evolves, the narrative introduces a sophisticated model of distributed intelligence, where problem-solving is not centralized but shared across different systems, each contributing unique capabilities. And this distribution increases efficiency, reduces individual cognitive burden, and enhances adaptability, illustrating how complex challenges are best addressed through cooperative frameworks rather than isolated effort. And this principle has significant implications beyond the story, suggesting that future advancements in science, technology, and society will depend increasingly on integrated systems of intelligence, including human collaboration, artificial intelligence, and potentially even interactions with non-human forms of cognition. And from a storytelling perspective, this layered complexity is supported by a structure that alternates between micro-level problem-solving and macro-level stakes, ensuring that the audience remains engaged with immediate challenges while remaining aware of the broader consequences. And this dual focus creates a sense of scale that is both intimate and expansive, allowing viewers to connect emotionally with the protagonist while also appreciating the magnitude of the mission. And visually, this balance can be reinforced through shifts in framing, perspective, and environmental detail, using close-ups to convey internal states and wide shots to emphasize isolation and scale, creating a dynamic visual rhythm that mirrors the narrative's intellectual and emotional progression. And in terms of thematic integration, the story weaves together concepts of survival, cooperation, knowledge, and adaptability into a cohesive framework that reflects fundamental principles of life itself, suggesting that success in any environment depends on the ability to learn, adapt, and collaborate effectively. And this universal applicability contributes to the story's potential for long-term relevance as it resonates with audiences across different contexts and time periods. And ultimately, the richness of Project Hail Mary lies in its ability to operate on multiple levels simultaneously, functioning as a suspenseful survival narrative, a detailed exploration of scientific methodology, a psychological study of resilience and cognition, and a philosophical reflection on the nature of intelligence and cooperation, creating an experience that is both intellectually stimulating and emotionally engaging, leaving a lasting impression that extends beyond the immediate narrative and into broader considerations of how humans understand, adapt to, and navigate the unknown. Continuing further into the expanding intellectual landscape of Project Hail Mary, one of the most compelling dimensions emerges when we interpret the narrative through the lens of epistemology, the study of knowledge itself. Because throughout the story, the protagonist is not simply gathering information, but constantly questioning the reliability, origin, and limitations of that information. And this creates a layered process in which observation leads to hypothesis, hypothesis leads to experimentation, and experimentation leads not to absolute truth, but to increasingly refined approximations of reality. And this iterative refinement mirrors the fundamental structure of scientific understanding, where certainty is never complete and knowledge is always provisional. And by embedding this epistemological framework into the narrative, the film transforms each discovery into both a solution and a new question, sustaining engagement through continuous intellectual curiosity, while also reinforcing the idea that the pursuit of knowledge is an ongoing process rather than a final destination. And alongside this, the concept of resilience evolves beyond simple endurance into what can be described as adaptive resilience, where survival depends not on resisting change, but on continuously adjusting to it. And this distinction is critical because the environment in which the protagonist operates is not static, but constantly presented